Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO Podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I am just one of your co-hosts. I'm here with my better partners, Webb Tannenbaum and Patsy Freeman. How are both of you today?
I am well.
I am well and enjoying some sunshine for a change.
Yeah, it's summer on the West Coast here, which often brings the blue skies that we don't get for the other 10 months a year. But I'm excited about our show today. Listener, thank you for tuning in today because our guest on the podcast is Dr. Thom Mayer. Now, Thom is among the most widely respected leaders in times of crisis and is a highly sought after speaker and consultant across many businesses and industries. His work has been described as gasp worthy, which that's a great word, worthy of gasps. And his books have sold hundreds of thousands of copies and won numerous awards. We'll get into that today. He's currently the medical director for the NFL Players Association. He's also executive vice president of leadership for Logix Health, founder of Best Practices, Inc., speaker for Executive Speakers Bureau, and the clinical professor of emergency medicine at George Washington University. And finally, senior lecturing fellow at Duke University. And while Thom may not necessarily be on your fantasy football team, USA Today named Thom as one of the 100 most important people in the NFL. So, Thom, I guess if there was going to be a behind-the-scenes fantasy team, you would probably be a top 5 pick, I would think.
Well, I'm delighted to be on. I love your podcast. I love the name. You know, you might say frustrated CEO. Isn't that redundant? In some ways, but I'm really thrilled to be on and pleased. Actually, you were so gracious in your introduction. I thought maybe you'd gotten another podcast guest, but thank you very much.
Thank you. We are excited to have you for sure.
So, Thom, as Patrick introduced, you have found yourself in many times of crisis, just as many of our listeners, our CEOs, find themselves in crisis. Hopefully not as world-ranging as you have found, but on every day. And I think it's important to make the right decisions at the right level. And I know you make an important decision between data, knowledge, and wisdom, all important information when you're trying to make a decision. Could you just describe those three a little bit better and how you've come to distinguish those?
Yeah, I think, first of all, I was both a football player in college, but also a theology major. More in that if we have time. So take a middle linebacker and a theology major, and that's some kind of warped mentality right there. I mean, just by definition. But it strikes me that, data, knowledge, and wisdom are not the same thing. As a matter of fact, they're not remotely the same thing because we're choking on data. Data is, whatever feedback we're getting on what is occurring or what has occurred. But that's different than knowledge. How do you take that data, translate it to knowledge in terms of an understanding of how the system, how the processes, how the people within that team, and we all work in teams, more on that I'm sure, are going to be able to not only look backward, but to look forward. So knowledge helps us a great deal, but the real key is wisdom. What does it mean? Our middle son, Kevin, when he was about 10 years old, I came home from work one day and he was working on his homework and you could tell he was frustrated. And I said, Kevin, would you like help with your homework? And he said, sure, I'd love that, Dad. And so I read the passage. It was an English passage. And I said, okay, Kevin, this is what it says. And he threw his pen down and he said, Dad, I know what it says. What does it mean? And Kevin and his beautiful wife and 3-month-old boy are visiting us now. So it's quite a joy, but that's what it means. I mean, what it means, wisdom is the true issue that helps a CEO understand, this is where we've been. This was our strategic plan. This was our culture. But where has it taken us till now? And how do we negotiate our way out of that woods to truly understand what it means? Because I think when those guys, we had 3 boys, Maureen, my beautiful and brilliant wife, and I had 3 boys. And when they were younger, I used to take them to school. And every day when I'd take them to school, when I dropped them off, they'd get out of my truck and I'd say to them the same words exactly. One more step in the journey of discovering where your deep joy intersects the world's deep needs. I swear I said this to them. They prefer to take the bus, as you might guess. But that's the key. I think you have to start with your deep joy. Meaning, what is it that motivates you? What's your true north? What's your why? A lot of different ways to say it. But once you do that, if you stay true to that, it's a whole lot easier to sort out the data from the knowledge from the wisdom.
Great. So in times of crisis, especially at any time we're making difficult decisions, it's easy to get swept away by the need to make the decisions and not know how to really access our wisdom. What has been some of your ways of pausing for a second to really access your wisdom?
So a couple things. Through strange circumstances, a couple of years ago, my wife and I ran into Sully Sullenberger and his wife at dinner here in Wyoming, and subsequently had a conversation and was asked, what's your central thesis? And I said, well, I don't think there's any true leading except in times of crisis. And she laughed and Sully laughed, and I didn't understand why. And Sully shared that his view is, he said, and I'll never forget this, he said, you're not really a pilot until the engines go silent.
Oh, gosh.
If you can imagine, Miracle on the Hudson, that's Sully Sullenberger.
Right.
And, if you don't know this, it's a really important fact, I think, but underemphasized and underknown. His hobby is flying gliders. That's what he does in his spare time. So in effect, he was flying a very large glider with 155 souls on boards. So, that becomes important. Specifically to your point, in terms of leading in times of crisis, I get asked, hey, Doc, you were the command physician at the Pentagon on 9/11. What did you learn from that? And I learned a lot of things from that. When you show up, first of all, it looks like this can't be real. It looked like some kind of Hollywood movie scene, with the Pentagon on fire and parts of a plane embedded. But the biggest thing I learned, and it's both counterintuitive, contrarian, as most of the book is stop sucking up, start sucking down. And the world's full of suck ups, and we don't like them, and yet we tolerate them. Marshall Goldsmith talks about, why do we tolerate suck ups when we all agree that we don't like them? What do I mean by that? Well, when I got there were 37 3- or 4-star generals standing behind me when I was there, and they're good people, honorable people, well-intentioned, well-trained people. But they weren't going to be able to help me. I couldn't turn my back on the Pentagon and talk to them. I needed to suck down to the structural engineers, to the Army Corps of Engineers, to the firefighters, the suppression crews, to the FBI evidence recovery team, because our combined role with me in command was how do we get a safe scene so we could go into the building with SCBA, not scuba underwater, but SCBA tanks and masks to go recover, hopefully live people, and if not, recover those who didn't survive the crash. So I just think I think it's just good advice. I'm an emergency physician as well as sports medicine. If I want to really know what's going on in my emergency department, I don't need to talk to the CEO, no offense. I need to talk to the people who do the work on a day-to-day basis to say, okay, how do we fix that? I'm not so interested in the C-suite as I am in the we-suite, the people who do the work. And that's not a swipe in any way at CEOs and the important work that they do. But if CEOs are making the decisions of how work systems and processes are done in the trenches, then I'd be very surprised if that's a successful corporation, successful team, because even if we used to do it, I mean, I used to be an emergency physician most of the days of my life. I'm too distant from it. Let's talk to the folks that go through it
Mhm.
on a daily basis.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
So I have a question on that, and it's you write about this in your book. And by the way, since you brought up the book, let's go ahead and mention Tom's latest book, "Leadership is Worthless, but Leading is Priceless: What I Learned from 9/11, the NFL, and Ukraine." So we can certainly poke all around there for sure. But you write about this in the book. You write about listening in particular. And you just kind of touched on it in a couple of different ways. You make a statement that listen as if you are certain you are wrong. Talk about the struggle that we have in listening and like speaking to our CEO audience. How does the struggle of listening or how does perfecting listening impact their ability to lead, depending upon what direction you want to go?
Yeah. So your listeners, viewers won't have to worry about, wait a minute, what is this title about? I'll take that and then talk about silence. Leadership is worthless because it's just something you say, and anybody can say anything, and a lot of people do. But leading is priceless because it's what you do all day, every day, not just people in the C-suite, but throughout the organization, because all people who are involved in teams and teamwork are leaders. And that is a critical distinction, so that the focus is not that the answers are above us in the organization. My view is that they're within and among us, and we have to discover those and lead our part of the organization, our part of the team, our part of the family on a daily basis. And we can go into that in more depth if you want. But if you take the 6 letters, listen, LISTEN. First of all, we're not educated on listening. Most people aren't listening. They're waiting, usually impatiently, for someone else to finish talking so they can say something really important. And it's a problem. It's a big problem. I learned, I worked for the Indian Health Service, and I learned that as as a culture, we're not taught to listen. You can take those 6 letters and rearrange them and make them into a far more powerful word. And I use this in a slide when I'm speaking to an audience. It morphs into silent. We're not comfortable with silence. If I stop talking for 5 seconds right now, all 3 of you would be uncomfortable, and so would the listening audience. They'd wonder, did my connection go away? And yet, that thoughtful ability to absorb what people are saying and to use active listening to say back, here's what I heard you say. I want to make sure I understood you correctly, because what you're saying is extremely important to me. Here's what I heard you say. Did I get that right? And when I talk to my patients all the time, and at the end I tell them, sometimes I don't explain myself very well. So if you don't mind, could you just repeat back what you heard me say, just to make sure that we're on the same place? Because patients walk out of physicians' offices or emergency departments all the time, and people say, what did the doctor tell you? I don't know. We got to get better at that. And in teams, we have to get better at that as well. So investing in listening is important. I hear this all the time. I don't have time. You don't have time not to have time. You know what? If you don't have time to do it right, you don't have time to do it over, and you'll do it over. They will make you do it over. So to me, it's a business equation. It's ROI. What's the return on investment of listening carefully, of communicating effectively, and taking the time to do that?
I want to take us to culture for a minute. I was recently in a meeting going through a whole lot of data, so I'll tie it to the data, and there was verbatim feedback as well, which also added to kind of the knowledge pool of data. But when it came to wisdom, the room got really quiet. And
Usually does.
Yeah, and we had what we did is we drew a picture, and the picture on a flip chart had a very large head with a normal sized neck and a chest up to, several inches, and it had a little tiny heart in it. The listening, and I'd love to hear how you place this, can all get stuck in your head. But
Oh, no question
what
about
the
it.
culture was asking for is a soul, something they could emotionally connect with.
Yeah, I'm often asked, hey, Doc, what was it like at the Pentagon on 9/11, leading the concussion crisis, the CTE crisis, leading, the NFL players through COVID, Ukraine. I just got back from Normandy, escorting 60 D-Day veterans back to the Normandy beaches. So I'm asked that question, what was it like? And the answer is and I'm not making this up. We didn't set this up ahead of time. The path to the head is through the heart. The path to the head is always through the heart. The boss, and I capitalize that, is someone, because it's not a term of endearment to me. The boss is somebody who thinks that he's the most important person in the room. The leader is somebody who knows that their job is to make everyone else in the room feel that they're the most important person in the room. And what I mean by that is you have to become, not just as a physician, but in any leading role, and we're all in leading roles and we're all leading in times of crisis, you have to become the chief storyteller. The great Danish writer Isak Dinesen, whose real name was Karen von Blixen. You probably remember Out of Africa, Meryl Streep and Robert Redford. That was her story. And how pathetic that she had to write under a male's name to get her work published. I mean, don't get me started, as the saying goes. But she said all sorrows can be born if you can put them into a story or tell a story about them. Well, every CEO, every leader within an organization needs to be able to tell the story of, in my case, the patient, or in the case of the customer writ large, including internal customers as well as, not just the external customer. And as you said, it's a great question. You obviously are winding me up here, but but the great Peter Drucker said, culture eats strategy for breakfast every day. And that's true. But culture is not the words on the walls. It's the happenings in the halls. It's what the people in the organization do. And when I'm in times of crisis, if I got to look up at the wall to figure out what to do, something's wrong. And I'm not going to be very effective at leading people in times of crisis. So if you think about it, Aristotle was right. He said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence then is not a virtue, it's a habit. So when people say, here's our culture of our organization, come in and help us with a consultation, my answer is, you know what? Yeah, give me 5 minutes. I'll watch your team. I'll tell you what your culture is. Now, this is liberating in my view. Why? Because every day I go to work, every day anyone goes to work, they have an opportunity to create a culture, one patient at a time, one person at a time, one customer at a time, one interaction at a time. And so all those things to me, come together in a way that say, data, statistics, head, flow charts, all that. Tell me the story of what this is all about. Tell me the story of who you're serving and the people who are serving those people.
That's fantastic. Do you see, Thom, in the midst of this, we're talking about data, we're talking about getting stuck in your head, we're talking about the journey actually from the heart to the head, but how do you see, because you've been in so many situations over the years, the impact of remote work and technology in the creating the culture that's in the halls when the halls are virtual?
Yeah, it's an excellent question, and I think it starts with hire right or repent for a very long time, and And when I got my job as the NFLPA's medical director, August 1st, 2001, Corey Stringer, a tackle for the Vikings, died of heat stroke. Inconceivable, even in 2001. I get a phone call from Gene Upshaw, who was, as many of you remember, was a great Hall of Fame left guard for the Raiders, but also the executive director of the NFL Players Association. And he called me because he trusted me to step up and take a job which had never been done before. They'd never had a medical director before. So people say to me, hey, Doc, how do I build my resume to get a job like yours? And my answer is, don't build resumes, build relationships.
Yeah.
Relationships are what matter the most. I don't know about you, but most resumes are written in such a way that I have no idea what that person's deep joy is. I have no idea what they're like. What will it be like to deal with them, whether side by side or side by side virtually, in times of crisis? And frankly, if I can't sleep well, I just pull out some resumes and start reading, and I'm out. I'm out. So the question becomes emphasis, a matter of emphasis. Are we going to emphasize relationships? Are we going to emphasize resumes? Are we going to emphasize data? Or are we going to emphasize knowledge and wisdom? I happen to think that they can be shared, just as we're interacting virtually right now, that they can be done that way. But you start a meeting and the first statement is, lights out, slides up, show me the data, as opposed to how you guys doing? How you feeling? Hey, I want to read you a letter I just got from a customer that you took care of, or a patient that you took care of. Let's start by talking about how you impacted someone's life in a positive way. And not just that, they took the time to sit down and write a letter and email, whatever it might be. So I think it's a matter of emphasis, and of course we have to deal with the circumstances that we have. But I will tell you, I've talked to multiple really, really intelligent people in the AI field, and have said, data, knowledge, and wisdom, can you get us to wisdom with AI? And their answer uniformly has been no, which is fascinating.
Thom, I have a question. So you've, some of the things you've mentioned, pretty intense situations. Pentagon on 9/11, right? Even I'd love to hear more about the story, Normandy and the CT, some pretty significant crises. How do you, as speaking again to our listeners who deal with crises on a regular basis, how do you balance all of that and not lose yourself in the process? How do you not burn out? How do you prioritize yourself somewhere on that list? This is self-care aspect of leadership.
So I actually wrote a book on burnout and have done a lot of work on that. Someone said, how long have you been working on burnout? I said, all my life, all my career. And part of the reason I wrote it was because, first of all, I think if you write a book and you can't summarize the book in about 30 words, you ought to go back to the drawing board and start all over, start editing and thinking about it. So burnout, there are books that a book long defining burnout. They're a paragraph long, they're a chapter long. I'm an emergency physician. I have AD. I'm sorry, what were we talking about? Sorry. Yeah, I really do. So I'm not making fun of anyone other than myself. But my point is, definitions should drive solution. And so my definition of burnout is very simple. And that is, burnout is the inability to feel your deep joy at work. It's what restrains you from jumping for joy going into work as opposed to going home from work. And that's just a simple ratio of job stressors divided by resilience or adaptive capacity. And so I want to fix definitions, drive solutions. If I want to fix burnout, what do? If I want to reconnect people to their deep joy, I got to help decrease their job stressors. How do I do that? Maybe I should listen. Maybe I should be silent and let them tell me what their job stressors are, not just assume what they are. And then how do we, to your question about self-care, how do we get to the point where we truly can take care of ourselves? So here's my summary of the burnout book. Number one, every team member is a leader. Lead yourself, lead your team. Every team member is a leader. Number two, every team member, every leader is like my 2,500 athletes in the NFL, involved in a cycle of performance, rest, and recovery. Performance, rest, and recovery. So take care of yourself, take care of your team. And as you know, we have badly funded, underestimated, underinvested, frankly, in performance. No, we've invested in that, but rest and recovery, we've underinvested in that. And someone would say, well, wait a minute, didn't Christina Maslach, who's a close friend, talk about emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and loss of meaning at work? Yeah, but those are the symptoms. I don't treat symptoms. I treat root causes. I treat what created the disease in the first place. Simple example. And again, Christina and Michael Leiter, her writing and research partner, and I have talked about this. If as a CEO, I say to my team, I got burnout 50%, that's what it is in emergency medicine. And I say to my team, don't be so cynical. Don't be so emotionally exhausted. You know what? Don't lose your meaning at work. Reconnect. What the hell does that, pardon my language, what does that mean? What am I supposed to do with that? I mean, that just makes no sense. So directly to your point, self-care is critical care. Let me say that again. Self-care is critical care, not at the expense of the team and of the people we serve. But we have to understand we have to take care of ourselves in order to be able to take care of others. When I get on an airplane, you guys know the flight attendant is going to say this verbatim. Make sure your oxygen mask is firmly in place before trying to take care of others, because you can't take care of others if you're not oxygenating, if you're not resting and recovering in order to perform.
If it's not appropriate, we won't go there. But I'm a sports fan, and I've been playing. I still play basketball, and I'm way too old to play basketball. At least some people say. But what disturbs me about sports, and it seems to come up in every sport, sometimes more frequently than and more visibly than maybe anybody intended. But there's this practice of giving people a way to continue to play when they shouldn't be playing, when they're hurt, when they're injured, and I just saw it in the NBA finals. That's an NBA team, so there's someone who owns it, and there's a president. There's all this structure, but how does that translate to crisis, or what I would call competitive on the field? And maybe the person is even asking for that kind of treatment so they can stay in, but they're going to pay for it.
Yeah, I can't tell you how many players have said to me over the years, Doc, you got to protect me from myself. You got to protect us from ourselves. Of course, they want to play. They want to play because they're competitive, because they're loyal, because they're teammates, because, and they want to keep their job. The average length of a career in the NFL is 3.5 years. And that means there's going to be, injury is a huge threat to them. Let's also think about the fact, and I know you guys have from studying your work, but every injury to an NBA player, NFL player has a huge behavioral health issue embedded within it. You tear your ACL, you tear your Achilles. Those are the two things I'd advise you about. Just stretch. It's hard to stretch ACLs, but make sure your Achilles are stretched well before, because as you know, that's it happens in basketball all the time. But to me, we'll go anywhere the science takes us, but nowhere the science doesn't. So when it comes to those issues, we look at the science. And give you an example. I won't use the players' names. We never do. But a player called me up, and he's trying to get signed to a club. He's a free agent. He had ACL surgery 6 months ago, and wants to go back and work out for the clubs. We call them clubs, not teams in the NFL. And so the conversation I had was a difficult conversation, but we all have to have difficult conversations. And I started by saying, I'm going to have to tell you something that you're not going to like, and you're not going to agree with me, but it's my job to tell you what the science says. And that is, if you're an NFL team physician and you look at the literature, that you're not fully recovered from an ACL tear, even with the best of surgeons, until 9 months. And so I'm not telling you you can't go work out, but I'm telling you, if you try to do so, you are very likely to hear from the team physician that, hey, we can't medically clear you. That's the term we use. You hear it on TV all the time, until the 9-month level. And he actually thanked me at the end and said, "You're right. I don't agree, and you're right. It's a difficult thing to hear, but at least you've prepared me for what I'm going to hear from the club physicians." Well, 3 months later, I get this phone call over the transom. "Hey, doc, I just signed. Thank you." And so, it's keeping the whole thing in context. And the chances of him going back at 6 months and re-tearing, I don't know. He might have retorn, but he didn't re-tear at 9 months, and he's signed to a contract that he's very happy with. So a lot of times that's true. We talked about burnout. Sometimes you have to go to your employees and say, "Listen, I appreciate it, but you got to take care of yourself as well." I mean, you got to show all the signs of cynicism, emotional exhaustion, and a sense of loss of meaning. And do me a favor. I'm not asking you to close your computer and go home. I'm telling you that's an order. Do it.
Got it. That's good.
You almost see the synergy, like the parallel, and it's a crude parallel, but the parallel between CEO and the medical director, where basically your employees are counting on the leader, counting on the CEO to protect them from themselves, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's that the great Tom Peters, who was the one who came up with that term gasp worthy, and thank you, Tom, again. He's a great man, close friend, traveled over 3 million miles to help people lead better. But as you know, he said, "You're the CEO of Me Inc." And just as I say, everyone's a leader. Everyone is a leader. They're the CEO of Me Inc. And sometimes they have to tell themselves, "You know what? Put the brakes on here a little bit, rest and recover, get ready to go back." And if they can't sleep, I send them some resumes. Sorry.
that's good.
Sorry.
I have one last question before, and then I'll give my peers an opportunity as well.
Sure.
I think Tom, you talk about this in the book as well. You talk about the critical role of failure in leadership. How can our listeners, our leaders, turn failures into opportunities for growth and innovation?
Yeah, so 3 things, everything's simple to me. My friend Mark Verstegen, who founded the greatest performance company in the world, Exos, says simple things done savagely well. And that's what we tried to do. So when you start to look at, what do I want people to do? I want them to think about leadership and leading in a radically different way, a contrarian way. I want them to act on those thoughts within the week. Because if anyone listens to any of your podcasts and they don't change what they're doing in some way, large or small, within a week, they're not going to do it. Not because they're bad people, because they're people. That's our human nature. So throw the gauntlet down, do something different. But the third is innovate. You got to innovate it. Innovation does not occur, no offense to Elon Musk or Steve Jobs or any of the other potentates, at the speed of genius or intelligence or creativity. Innovation occurs at the speed of trust, because if people don't trust each other, they won't step outside the boundaries to say the way we're working isn't working. We all agree with that because of the burnout rates. We have to innovate new ways to do it. But so often you hear people say, the great New Yorker cartoon, guy's looking down at his cat and says, "Never, ever think outside the box." Well, there's that, but there's too many times, maybe the frustrated CEO is the perfect place to say this, that when a CEO says think outside the box, they don't mean that. They mean think inside my box. That's not going to take anywhere, in my opinion, because people have to be trusted to fail. Samuel Beckett, the great Irish playwright, was superb at this. He said, "Ever tried, ever failed? No matter. Try again, fail better." And that only comes when you can make failure your fuel. The great Abby Wambach, that I've had the privilege of being the warm-up act at a couple of conferences with, talks in her great Barnard College speech about make failure your fuel. Edison said the same thing in a different way. "I didn't invent the incandescent light bulb. I invented 1,000 ways not to make an incandescent light bulb. Any CEO, particularly startup CEO, knows what that means. Nelson Mandela said, resentment is like drinking poison and hoping it will kill your enemies. Don't resent failure. Trust failure to be your fuel. 2000 NFL draft, 199th player selected in that draft. Can you imagine? His name was Tom Brady.
Right.
And trust me, he used that, what he considered to be failure, because he expected to be drafted before, as fuel. And he can tell you in what round, by what club, every quarterback, the 6 quarterbacks ahead of him were taken. And do you think he took special joy in clubbing them every time he played them? You bet. So I think there are always ways to make failure your fuel, and to have that sense of trust that, let's, look, my NFL guys, probably like NBA, I don't know this in the NBA, but if you total up the amount of time they spend in the weight room, the practice facility, and playing a game, and it's compared to game film, they spend 3 to 5 times more time studying game film, looking at their failures. How could we get better? What could we do differently? So I think that joy, the deep joy of understanding it's not all going to work. And sometimes even when it works, it doesn't fully work. And so that sense of treating it as true fuel that can be helpful.
Well, as a New York Jets fan, I'm trying not to resent the fact that you brought up Tom Brady. My team is
Sorry about
loved
that.
year after year after year, but thanks for that. So,
No worries. Hey, the big guy's back. Aaron's back.
That's fair.
Yeah.
I'm looking at my colleagues. Any final questions?
I have a question to tag on to what you were just talking about, Tom, and that is what fuels innovation. I think you mentioned questioning, asking questions fuels innovation. Certainly, it's easy for CEOs to think we have to have all the answers versus how do I question? How do I be curious?
Well, it's a great question. I wrote a book called Hardwiring Flow. And despite the generous comment that Patrick made, that book sold tens of copies. But my 30-word summary of how do you hardwire flow? We're talking, of course, how to hardwire systems and processes for flow through an organization. Out of the great work of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who kindly wrote one of the marketing blurbs for that. But here's the summary of hardwiring flow when it comes to systems and processes. Number 1, stop doing stupid stuff. And we do a lot of stupid stuff. Okay. And number 2, start doing smart stuff. Okay. How do you do smart stuff? Is you ask the people doing the work what's stupid and what's smart, and how do we change that? Instead of, does the CEO have a role? Absolutely. Creating the milieu, creating the enzymatic reactions, the catalytic reactions. So when people are hired, we talked about hire right, they realize I got a job, but my other full-time job is figuring out how to improve this job, how to make this job better for the people who do it and for the customers who we serve.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Beautiful.
I have one last question.
Sure.
You said you mentioned innovation and the speed of trust. I think, I guess anything that you might offer to a frustrated leader who expects people to trust them, and yet they haven't shown something essential that actually builds or breeds that trust. Are there any qualities or anything you want to share about being a trustworthy leader?
Yeah, it's an absolutely penetrating question and an important one. Number 1, close the door. Turn out the lights. Sit and think to yourself, what's my deep joy? Have I strayed from my deep joy? And if so, how have I strayed from my deep joy? Because I think it begins with that internal conversation. I think to the point that we were talking about earlier, listen silently to the people you work with and say, a couple ways to ask the question. You don't think that I've created an environment where we lack trust, do you? Well, that's not going to be very helpful. You're not letting them say, starting a conversation by saying, and I think every CEO should start most conversations with these words: I need your help.
Mm.
I need your help. The reason is most people will give you their help if you say that, but then follow it saying, I need your help. I'm seeing signs that I've created a milieu of mistrust. I need you to talk to me honestly about that without any fear of reprisal whatsoever. And I'll just listen. And usually, that's the journey back. That's the journey back to saying, this is what, and sometimes it's an eye roll, and sometimes it's a shoulder shrug. Sometimes it's the smallest of things
Mhm.
that help people say, well, instead of wow, that's great. Tell me more about this idea. Help me understand better what this idea is going to look like. And then the second thing, in addition to I need your help, I think is what would have to be true for us to put that to work? What would have to be true in this organization for us to have a conversation around trust that we truly believe that we can help each other? And then at the end of the conversation, being able to say to the whole team, is there anyone in this room who can't commit to the ideas that we've discussed here? Because, there's plenty of people who will nod and smile, suck up during the course of a conversation. But I think you have to flesh them out to be able to say, if you can't agree with it, tell us now and tell us why. And we'll try to react to that. So you'll have to forgive me. My wife thinks that my next book should be entitled Everyone's Entitled to My Opinion. So
That's awesome.
Thank you.
Beautiful. All right. Is it time to get practical? I'm seeing head nods. For those who are listening, we have a YouTube channel. If you actually want to see our heads nod, as opposed to just listen to our heads nod, certainly you can do that and follow along the journey. But as you know, this is the part of every episode where Tom, you mentioned it earlier. It's like, okay, you've got just a few days, just a week or so to put something into practice, or else this might have been an interesting conversation, but nothing changes. So in that short amount of time that between now when you're listening and the next handful of days, our goal here in the Let's Get Practical is to give you some specific actionable things that you can do to grow your leadership, to better build the teams in your organization. So Tom, I'll let you go first if you're. Well, actually, I know you've got opinions, so we welcome them. What are two or three suggestions you would have for a listener?
So the first is understand, as you might guess, it's not about what you say, it's about what you do. If words inspire you to act, then they're important words. But words alone are not good enough, and that's why leadership is worthless, but leading is priceless. Number two, the answers are not above you, they're within and among you in your organization. The leader you're looking for is you. Look in the mirror, wake up in the morning, and don't say, someday I will be a leader. Say, today, exclamation point, I am a leader, and this is how I will lead. If this is my deep joy, what is the culture? What are my core values? And how am I going to embody those core values today, not at some point in the future? Don't ever let anyone call you a future leader. That's toxic, demeaning. It has no place in a true organization of trust, because it implies someday you'll be a leader when in fact you already know you are already a leader in your part of that organization. Think, act, and innovate. And innovation occurs at the speed of trust. Make failure your fuel, and make sure that you're creating a milieu of trust where others can share, why didn't things go as well as they could have? Why did that play in the NFL or NBA get busted, and how to move forward? And become the chief storyteller. Tell the story to your clients, your patients, your customers of what's going on and how you want to serve them. Make them feel a part of the team. They should be the most important part of the team. Make it personal. What's the one, we talk about precision and personalized medicine. Same is true in business. What's the most important, this is a question you ask, what's the most important thing I can do to make this an excellent experience for you, both to the customer and to the internal customers that you work with? And you probably saw this coming. Have fun. Have fun. I mean, it's got to be. I mean, if you're living your deep joy, what's more fun than that? As long as you understand there'll be failures, and that failures are your fuel, and you don't get bogged down in them, then it's fun. It's a fun journey to be on.
Mm.
And then finally, I didn't talk about this earlier. 3 good things. At the end of the day, sit down, preferably write down, but at least think of 3 good things that happened that day. And then think about your role in what those 3 things were, how you either caused them to happen or accentuated or were part of that enzymatic catalytic reaction, and move it forward.
I love that. That's great. Thank you. All right,
Sure.
Leb.
To be successful, especially in leading, listen and listen actively.
Mhm.
Get some feedback. See what they heard. One thing that didn't get mentioned, but it's tied to listening, is leaders create some context for your message or your words, because sometimes people don't know how to hear what you really want them to, what you're saying.
I agree with that. And that context is usually a story,
Yeah.
Tell a story.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where was it? Let's see, trust. It was trust, and the path. Well, it's tied to heart and trust. That the path to the head is through the heart. And I guess the last thing I'd say then is it's okay to be vulnerable.
Yeah, as you know, Brene Brown has done great work on vulnerability. I really admire her work on that.
Yeah. Okay, Patsy.
We wouldn't be complete if we didn't say stop sucking up, start sucking down. That's like a very unique. Let's get practical. I loved it that you talked about culture is what's happening in the hallways and what comes up in times of crisis. And I also appreciated that excellence is a habit.
Mm-hmm.
We have to practice.
Yeah, it's ancient wisdom.
Yep.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And the last, well, there's so many more. Don't build resumes, build relationships.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, Patrick, I'll leave you a few, but there's a lot of goodies left.
Thank you for taking that, because that was on my list. I'm like, oh, but I have too many. What am I going to get rid of? And you just took that one. So that's awesome. I know which one I'm going to save for last. Tom, I loved, it's pretty simple, but it's great wisdom for our listeners. Stop doing stupid stuff and then start doing smart stuff. And don't answer those questions yourself. Engage your people for help determining what's the stupid stuff that we should stop and what's the smart stuff we should start. I love this. I thought this is very practical. Start every conversation with, I need your help. Right? It's very disarming. I think it elevates the person to your level. Like, I need your help, or even higher. I love that. That was great. You talked a lot about deep joy. This is where I want to end. The last one that I want to add is, you talked a lot about deep joy. It was a thread that ran through several different topics. One of which is, right, it's the antidote to burnout. I'm just all over the place, but I almost want to end with where you started, which is start with your deep joy, stay true to it, and then seek to find its intersection with the world's deep need. I think it's very practical advice. So if, as a listener or as a leader, you're feeling that burnout, or you're feeling like you're wandering aimlessly, you're never stuck, right? Don't play the victim. You're never stuck. You are always in charge. Find your deep joy and then seek out its intersection with the world's deep need. I think that's great. Awesome. Anything I missed or left out, or anything we didn't cover?
You guys are great. I've really enjoyed this conversation.
Good.
This is fantastic. I'm honored to be on, and I knew I would enjoy it, but honestly, I didn't know I enjoyed it this much. This has really been fantastic. I appreciate your kindness and generosity.
I had a great time until Tom Brady came up, but that's okay.
There we go.
It's fine. I'll get over it.
Great.
Thom, first of all, thank you so much. Engaging and insightful, and I'm. This is already one of my favorite episodes. We haven't even released it yet. If someone is interested in I'm assuming they can find your books on Amazon, or is it at a website? What's the best way for somebody to?
Usually Amazon.
Okay.
If you like it, please leave a positive rating. If you don't, just throw it in the trash, and or give it to somebody you don't like, and they'll fall sound asleep. Just kind of like resumes. But if they need to reach me, my email is just thommayermd@gmail.com. And if I can help anytime, I will.
Excellent. Thom, thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Do it again sometime.
Yes. All right, listener, thank you for sticking with us to the end of another
you.
episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. You can find this episode's Let's Get Practical actually on our LinkedIn page. This is where you'll find this, as well as, and you can go to thefrustratedceo.com, where you'll find this episode and all previous episodes. And likewise, if you like this show, please do leave us a review, like and subscribe. That would be great for us as well.
Well, it's quite obvious to me that the three of you are following your deep joy in doing this. So thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, listener, we'll see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO podcast.